Hit me with your madness read.
All right, word. Oh man, and I've got a lot more madness to hit you with now than last time even. That's gross. But anyway, so if you're ready, as with anything I ever say, that the root of what I am seeking to communicate is spatial geometry, is the nature of spatial geometry. And the reason for this is that I not only do I believe, but it's fundamentally provable, very easily provable, that symbolism is mechanical by nature.
And what do you mean when you say symbolism is mechanical?
I mean that any word we use, any image we derive a meaning from, any vehicle for relative meaning that we use to communicate meaning is
I get the symbol part.
is mechanical. Well,
I just don't get the mechanical part.
It's just like this is where the logic and the physics come in, is that logic is an analog for causality.
Yes.
So,
but symbolism is not always logical.
Well, symbolism is contrived from contrived from the tools of logic. There can be invalid symbolism, absolutely.
I would say it's contrived from pattern recognition, which is logic. Would you say that's a form of, but it's imperfect logic. It's very flawed logic because it's often false pattern recognition. We have a propensity for false pattern recognition embedded into our biology. Absolutely. And I don't know if you've ever heard about this before, but you're probably familiar with this. The idea that evolutionarily we are prone to see more into things than there actually is there, because, for example, if you were trying to survive a tiger attack and you noticed that the grass was moving and you recognize that the grass moving means a tiger is coming, then if you recognize that false pattern, you're still more likely to survive than somebody who didn't recognize the pattern.
Absolutely. That is one of the tools in the toolkit. Precursor patterns, I call them. Essentially, the ability to read implicit structural emergence of pattern. That's not that you read too much into it, just that you've learned what patterns are precursors to what stimulus, and thus have this what would you call it, false pattern prediction engine?
False pattern recognition.
Now,
another example being every time we sacrifice somebody, it rains. You know.
Oh, that. No, that's correlation and causation.
Well, false pattern recognition.
Sure.
Sacrifice person one time, it starts raining. You see a pattern there.
Now, I say correlation causation because I'm seeking in this conversation to translate any biological mechanism into its logical analog.
Okay.
To show that for every single one of these, there is a logical analog. And that's the purpose of the logical analogs, is to make a correlation between our biology and our conscious mind in this life. Is that something you might agree with?
Say it one more time for me.
That the purpose of these logical analogs, these axiomatic constructions of if this then that put together in complex ways,
yes,
are there to act as analogs for our biological behavioral traits, like false pattern recognition, that they are there to show the mind the nature of its functionality written out as a mechanical measured thing, so that can be used as a tool, so one can realize if in that moment when it must feel true to be an effective tool, one can still use this measured tool of constancy to analyze the situation, and thus have a further degree of precision in the judgment of one's response.
Pattern recognition. That's what we are. We are dissecting pattern recognition machines.
Yes. So therefore, do you agree with my assertion then that it's all mechanical in that light?
Well, you could say everything is mechanical. So I'm not trying to say it's not mechanical. I'm more curious what you mean by mechanical.
Well, and that's what I mean by mechanical, is that it's pattern recognition and response is the nature of cognition in any degree, in any dynamic system, is the way that certain elements interact with other elements in a real-time scenario to exchange energy, which begins with observation and ends with physical material interaction. That's all energy exchange. And so it's all causal, all chains of causality that intersect into the synthesis of the now for the being who sits at the center of it. Period. But can be via logic, via these analogs of pattern deviation, can be bifurcated and deconstructed into stages and compartmentalized so that it can be understood in more specific conditional context.
Give me an example.
Light and dark.
Okay.
Good and evil, up and down, left and right. That these are universal for us. These universal. It's a gauge symmetry, is what I've learned.
I like how you qualified universal for us.
Yes, it's meant to be, because that's, as I said, what I've learned. I've been talking to this logician, / like advanced mathematical artificial neural network student guy. He's been giving me a lot of terminology to fill in the title, the things I refer to. And so a gauge symmetry is that when you have these two topologies, which are multi-dimensional measurements of energy exchange, say like traffic in a city would be a topology, or someone's daily behavioral pattern would be a topology, that when you're trying to measure two different topologies against each other, you need to have a standard by which to measure them. And so this is a gauge symmetry, is that you take this third item and you hold it up, and it will be only as effective as relevant it is to the two items you're measuring. But you hold it up to them, there'll be a third item to gauge them between, to find the symmetries in the system. And that this is what symbolism does, is it acts as a gauge symmetry between me and you as a third element that we can hold up to see the symmetries between our experiences and thus communicate. Therefore, symbolism is mechanical in that light. And therefore, it must follow a certain path of non-deviation between me and you, and to ensure effective communication.
So I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
And I've been wanting to ask you this since last time we talked. If you want to do an interview of me and ask me whatever you were wanting to do, we could do that too. I just had one thing I was curious about.
Okay.
So you said you were talking about the times when you were completely batshit crazy and out of your mind. And I'm wondering, how can you tell if you're crazy?
To put it in its most broadest, simplest format, at this juncture in time, if you were to ask me then, I would have a very different answer for you. At this
real quick, maybe we go to what your answer would have been then, and then we talk about what your answer would be now.
My answer then would have been the same as now, but just in very much more crude mechanics. I would have been using very vague symbolism to communicate something that would easily get lost in translation, because it was at the time. And therein lies a certain aspect of madness, are the filters that are placed over the way that information is sorted as it comes into the mind.
Yeah.
And so right now, I mean, back then I would have said there's no such thing as crazy, that the mind is manufacturing its reality and in a literal sense, and that you can just think thoughts, and eventually over time with a response consistent with the energy portion ratio, you could take that thing along as steps of causality and just bring it into your world. I would have told you that. I would like, you're not crazy. You can't be. All you have to do is learn how to use your crazy tools. Again, that's what I would have said to you. Now, I would say the same exact thing, but in the framework that you're batshit crazy. I'm batshit crazy. You know that, and I know that. What that means is that we live within an augmented reality. That we, if you want to look at, I use the phrase "all things are as they seem" as a basis for this, to check my sanity level, is that if the way we emerged was from body into language into higher intellect, that the base state of reality is physical, it's material, that is the most relevant aspect of your existence, because that's the most important part. It's what binds you here to it, and it's how you interact with it.
Got to stay grounded.
Yeah, if you want to know you're sane, make sure that every symbol you have for everything can immediately be demonstrated physically. Again,
and that would be a good way. Well, I'll just talk about sort of a good way that I would have diagnosed your insanity back then is I would say you were very up in the ether and you weren't grounded enough into yourself. And that was something that we talked about. And, my kind of definition of crazy and not crazy is if it works, and that's a good way to put it. If your craziness is getting you the output that you're mapping. So that was my challenge to you, Reed. I was always like, give me a goal and then accomplish that goal, and that'll prove what you're saying.
Okay, so is that the no, I love that challenge, actually, because that is the exact challenge that I would require to sway any person, period, in this regard. And what sort of goal would you like?
Me personally, I want the goal to be your goal.
But what would sway you? I could set any goal, but that would only be in approximation of the standard that you have, unless I have somewhere to go off.
I disagree on that. I think the only proper measurement is your own internal guidance. So I can never really judge your crazy. You have to judge your own crazy by almost an ethereal internal sensation of if you are on the right path or not.
Okay. Well, so what I was trying to tell you in the previous things, and I do want to talk about you here. I just wasn't as prepared as I would have liked, given it was just spontaneous. Is before telling the story, I was trying to communicate my goal to you because I have one, and I would love to tell you about it because it's a hell of a goal.
Tell me about your goal.
All right. Well, I do got to say that implicit with it, if this goal is accomplished, then I certainly hope that you will have been swayed long before this goal is accomplished because of the enormity of it. And because of each step along the way is an enormous step in a certain light, but are just steps in the light of the whole thing. As we just discussed, we live in an augmented experience, an augmented reality. Do you agree with this? Word. Just to specify, for the sake of if anyone else.
Hold on, my friend. Go ahead and answer this real quick. Hey, baby, I'm podcasting. What's up? I just texted you. Bye. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, wait. So I am building an analog of reality, an accurate one, is my claim, my bold assertion. And by analog, I mean essentially a game. Like in that comment that I put upon the Instagram, I don't know if you read it or not, about what constitutes a game. That a game is just a specialized behavioral framework that allows one to focus on certain behavioral attributes and accelerate their growth in a constrained format. Not anything that falls in that framework falls within the framework of a game, because you're creating a controlled environment to generate a controlled output. So the idea here is I have created several languages that all contain the exact same properties of each other language, and they start from a central point, from one infinitely small dot. That then, once you have it in your hand, your wheel, your zero, comes with, after you go through these developmental processes, 1. Here we have a language, a mathematically valid framework of emergent order, of how order emerges from one infinitely small dot into a line of two infinitely small dots, which implicit in the second dot. From the first dot, this is implicit because they have 1, you must have 2, because measurement comes in pairs, because you must have contrast to measure against each other. But that's implicit a third, which is the perspective that is measuring those 2. So from 1 automatically becomes 3. Now, what's implicit within those 3 is the fourth, in that you must automatically have a framework of measurement, again, for every new unit of measure. So that flips into a square, triangle, from asymmetry to symmetry in this light. And that flips into a pyramid. That along these iterations, and this also shows why pi is 3.
So why couldn't, just to challenge you and play the devil's advocate here a little bit. Let's get a little esoteric because you're taking me deep. Why isn't the fourth dot the pyramid?
The fourth dot is the pyramid. Is that's the fun part.
Well, you said you make a square, and then the fifth dot is the point of the pyramid.
Sorry, the fourth dimension is the pyramid. The fourth dimension is the fourth and fifth dot combined. That's the transition into curvature, into the third dimensional realm.
Gotcha.
And then after that, it just becomes different alterations of the structure, of the properties of the structure and its ability to contain information on a three-dimensional platform. And so that's why you have 3 prime dimensions that form the triangle, and then the fourth and the fifth is curvature. So you have the pyramid, and you have the circle. And those are the basis of the language, of object and subject. And the geometrical differentiation between them, and why pi is a forever iterating sequence of precision, of increasing precision, because the fourth dimension is curvature, is perspective. It's a deviating point in those 3-dimensional planes that moves around, and it's immeasurable in that light because it's dynamic, right? So that means that the nature, the equilibrium of that dot with its environment is dependent upon the internal and external mechanics achieving a parity, achieving an equilibrium between them in a flow of energy that begins with the outside environment into the dot and back out. And so therefore, there's a logic and language to being. There's a logic and language to consciousness, and it's derived from the physics of experience. And my claim is that all of what we consider social ills are a problem of language.
So here's the question. I'm just going to keep inserting random questions as they come to me. Where did this problem come from if it arises from this perfect system?
Oh, because this is how order emerges from order, is via the churning of what's called chaos, but I feel is more appropriately labeled as emergence. And that you have emergence and you have order. You have force never stops communicating, and you have the structure that can support it. That if your structure doesn't follow certain structural principles, eventually it will collapse. But from the beginning, so say we have these emergent properties of the species, our language, it's going to emerge along certain behavioral properties that are consistent with environmental traits, and that it will be an adaptation that's favorable. We know this off the bat. But over time, as this dynamic process of engaging with your environment, with other people, and to form a higher network of integration and tool access, then the more static data you accumulate to fill in those variable spots in your consciousness that are meant to be connecting dynamically, and the more you retain this data that doesn't move, the more your structure begins to have holes in it, because it's filling space that needs to be dynamically accessible. Does that make sense? And so therefore, when you behave, words take the place of behaviors in certain times. and one talks about things but doesn't do them. And so therefore feels as if they've accomplished them, because this is the way that false pattern recognition works, is via the language of negation, of how to isolate patterns from the big pattern, and then to intimate the implicit other side of it via language of negation, by finding the language of affirmation and inverting it. And I mean, is this all? I want to pause to make sure that I'm not just kind of about to.
Yeah, I again, as always, I resonate with it a lot. I see where it's coming from, and I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yes. All right. So now the goal. Basically, I've identified it down to material, intellect, and internal mechanics, spiritual. And those are the three basic archetypes of experience. And I think pretty much everyone agrees with that to some extent. I say there's a fourth dimension to experience, and that is what I call soul. And that's all three of those dimensions in tandem. So, and what that represents is the perpetual shortest path, as I say. The optimal behavioral conditionality in any scenario. What I'm proposing is to generate a game, a real-time RPG, MMORPG, LARP game in which one cognitively hacks the process of, I guess, schizophrenia, and uses it with intention. They use these languages that all structures in existence are built off of, these languages of validity and dynamic engagement that alternate on their framework in these expansive things that just from this one dot, via learning the language, it teaches one the whole process of how to interact with their body and how that interacts with its environment, and then back and vice versa. But it tells it in this very mechanically symbolic framework. It can be dynamically expanded and contracted, but it's also expressed in the simplest possible terms, in that the only symbolism it really uses is like fire, water, air, and earth. And so then all the subsequent synthesis of those, the higher models, are free to be labeled as whatever you want. You can attach whatever character you want to them. You can attach whatever personality you want to the fabric of the reality as you build a language that models physics accurately, externally and internally, and then unifies them via this dot. So this gives you all the dynamics of leverage of the body. This gives you the dynamics of leverage of the mind, and how to, of the subconscious very specifically, and how to meld them into a unity right here in the middle, and while giving all of your experience a complete dynamic personality that is the negation of you, that would be like, so for a man would be the feminine goddess aspect. All of experience would take on a personality of your own design that follows the validity of physics in the development of the cognitive aspect of what you would call God, to make it a real-time constant engagement in sacred symbolism, sacred art. So you're living like in a comic book, but you're efficiently, effectively, functionally doing it while integrated with your environment. So you can be batshit crazy and loving it. Everything is surprise and novelty, but you are not inhibited in any way. In fact, my argument is that you are greatly enhanced, because your growth is greatly accelerated if the physics of your mechanics internally are a perfect reflection of your environment. If your ability to be in that moment of flow is so innately structured into you via conditioning that you don't have to think about it. Again, because you've gone through that process of discipline and training that gives you these languages of self-control, self-mastery, and self-authorship to such a degree of precision that it is what I call a self-moving soul, that you have attained autonomy to the fullest possible degree within your environment. And that means you've accepted the functional limits of what you can do and what you should do, and you draw a wall there, you put restraint on your behaviors so you can funnel them into things that you want to do, again, and that you should do. And in this way, as I'm the way I'm structuring it, it's going to emerge with the story. The story is going to provide the overall basic structure of how one can translate fantasy into the mechanics of experience and social integration. And then when I'm trying to build the emergent framework is that like tribes would emerge, artistic tribes. And the thought would be like, say the world ended in the light of man, and that there's all these little survivors that were springing up and they were building their art. They're building their art of godhood, building their mythologies.
So now you're talking about the story that you're writing, just to clarify, if anyone might be listening, if we end up posting this, that we just cross the line between a vague line, a blurred line, some sort of barrier between this theory that you are implementing into your life, this practice, the system of internal self-actualization you are designing, and then this book that you are writing that is going to tell this story in fantasy, which I think is going to be really fucking awesome because you're wonderful with your words. So tell me more about this book.
Well, just how about books in general in this regard, and that the theory predicts, and I have found to be personally 100% true, that all of our stories and narratives and mythologies are mechanical and are meant to reflect behavioral models to show you what happens when you act certain ways, and then the way those things interact with each other, to build structures of emergent archetypes of consciousness. The hero's journey, it's just how narratives are structured.
True.
And but what I'm further arguing is that these structures are based off of 4 simple principles. Everything as base is off of listen, send, mass, leverage. That's it. Different amalgamations of those to form synthesis of the way that of spatial geometry in motion, the way that all things engage into a singularity of expression. Being is art. So in this light, the story is derived from the science. And this is what the language teaches as well, is that, oh yeah, I found out that the language is Hebrew as well. I'll tell you about that in a second. Again, it's pretty interesting. That the language is a moral code, is a dynamic behavioral moral code that built into it, it's also a martial art. So it can be expanded from just the frameworks of constant into the frameworks of engagement from any moment. Because anything, an emotion represents a thing with a stick, or thing with a hand, or thing with a knife. But it's also each thing, this represents the language of negation, the spoken, measured, immeasurable, measured. So the story is, I'm trying to tell the framework from a global social perspective of the behavioral dynamics of what behavioral traits in terms of a person emerge into social, cultural trends and patterns when held with other behavioral traits, and then to attach a fictional skin over that, because that allows a looseness in ability to predict what's going to happen in order to open up storyline, because you're taking emergent properties. All science fiction does this. That's why science fiction predicts so much technology. It takes emergent properties of society and it predicts what it's going to look like in the future, and then builds a story about what that society will look like framed around that technological innovation that they predict. And so it is this mechanism in a light for offering avenues to innovators to innovate in, because they can see from a non-immediately mechanical constraint what it might look like. And so therefore it shows a light to go towards, in a sense.
I'm excited to read this book, man.
Word. But anyway, so the goal I'm accomplishing every single day more and more is to answer every single question ever besides why. And then we'll just stop at that one, because there's more. But I hope at that point you will have been swayed. if I can present a single book that I'm working on, I think I'm going to call it Existence Explained in 42 pages. Present a simple book that adequately answers every single question ever, besides why, would that sway you? And if it was well received, if people were like, "Oh yes, this is a book that is correct."
I think what would sway me is when I was able to implement this in my own life in a way that brought value to me.
Okay, thank you.
So I think that's kind of the marker.
That is measurement. Absolutely. You're very well equilibrated as a conscious.
Thanks, bro. I'm ready. If you want to interview me, I'm all for it. What questions did you have for me, my friend?
Well, I want to begin with what is purpose to you?
Purpose is a feeling, a calling, a sense of rightness in your actions, a selflessness of a sort. Even if your purpose is completely selfless, your purpose puts itself before your immediate desires. So in having a purpose, you are in some way selfless because you are separating your truest self from your momentary self. It's an ideal. I look at it through the concept of resistance, man. I think there is within all of us this potentiality of what we could be if we were everything we knew we could be. If we made all the decisions that we knew we should. And within that, you can have many purposes. So I guess it can be subdivided in many ways. I don't know. Is that a good answer? What's your definition of purpose?
Well, just to do your practice of repeating back to you what you just said to make sure I understand it.
Yeah.
Which I don't want to do. I don't personally. I'm not looking to answer these questions myself. I am genuinely curious in what you gotta say. I have a tool I call the introspector. The idea is this little 3D ghost, little just ghost inside. It's like a carrot dangling in front that is built my idealized version of tomorrow, and in it, it's subdivided into all these little paths. Breaks down into what I mean by tomorrow. If I mean tomorrow, or if I mean a year from now, and then the proportional ratio of what I must do day by day by day by day by day to build up to that. And is that what you mean as it in terms of mechanically by purpose? Is it something that you can idealize to hold in front of you and use as a means of generating change?
See,
because
but
it is more important than you.
The interesting thing about it is that it evolves as you travel towards it. So this idealized future is ever changing, and therefore to hold yourself to one vision can almost be restrictive to the truth of purpose. So in that way, it's more of a feeling, because you could be striving towards what you think is right, get there and realize, even though you felt that it was right the whole way, that you're supposed to go a different direction now. And that could be realized halfway along the path. So it takes a certain level of in-tuneness to consistently realign. And it's a moment-to-moment thing. And then, willpower comes into play. So I do think we have a limited amount of willpower. And, it makes the game interesting. Because if we did have infinite amount of willpower, there would be no game to be had at all. Yeah. My thoughts, my response.
Again, to repeat and clarify for myself, because everything, it's important to me that I be able to reconcile everything mechanically. And in this way, I know that I understood what you said.
Gotcha.
That it deviates, as you said, that the sense of purpose is not a fixed vision. A singular vision will run you right into a wall. You're absolutely correct. And then it will keep you running into that wall if you don't change it. But what what is found, I believe, by running into that wall initially is what I was referring to earlier, symmetry. That you found that by continuing in that direction at that time, that is a thing that is a boundary to you. But by deviating in this light while maintaining the patterns, the true recognition patterns of what led you into that wall, then one, via this language of negation, knows what to cut out from the future behaviors in certain regards. And this as well refines over time, as well as one's vision, is one's anti-vision. And that is just as important to one's purpose, is in terms of guiding it and dynamically, is by what one learns in terms of how to restrain one's behaviors into a more functional format. Is that a framework?
And then there's what one learns, and then there's what one is able to apply.
Yes.
Which I think is kind of a key point of my curiosity about your whole theory, because what happens when this perfect model meets your inability to apply it?
Then I wouldn't get past that finger, because it's a 5-stage process: logic, theory, modeling, application, will. And then I would have stopped 3 years ago, because it's working in everything I'm applying it for. I just didn't know what I was supposed to apply it to the whole time. So everything I applied it to that it was meant to apply to, it worked wonderfully. But I thought it applied to a lot of other things that it didn't, which led me to thinking I could move things with my mind and do telepathy and things of that sort, because I hadn't yet learned the boundaries of restraint upon how to apply the tool. And the tool is merely a filing system. It's a model. It's a map, so that you can maintain. It's a dynamic map, so that you can maintain a constant refinement of precision of purpose. To put it really succinctly, that's exactly what it's meant to do.
Yeah. So we were talking about how that unfolds, because you were talking about the failure of will at times, and that kind of being the key point, where it's like we can structure archetypes in a way that gives us more will. Go ahead.
But now that I get to ask the questions, that means I get to guide the conversation.
Okay, please.
And I want to keep this on you. I want to see, now that I've asked you what is purpose, I want to ask you, what is your purpose?
Para bien del todo, for the good of all.
Okay. Can you expand that into how that would look in a daily format?
Yeah. Well, sidestep on purpose. I think there's for the good of all, and then there is for the good of all that is best for me to bring. The best piece that is right for me to bring towards the good of all, to clarify it a little bit better, because this became really clear to me when I was living with a roommate who really loved dogs, and a hurricane came through Austin, and she spent her time helping dogs because she loved dogs. She's really passionate about helping dogs. And when we were talking in the kitchen, she's like, I feel bad. Maybe I should be out helping these people, but I feel like I should be helping the dogs. And I just realized your purpose is to help the dogs because that's what you feel called towards. There's people who won't give a fuck about the dogs and will want to help the people. And in that way, it's like you can't distinguish what is right and wrong solely based on what is for the good of all, but what is for the good of all that feels like it's your part to contribute towards, I guess. I might be off course. Lead me back. What were you asking?
Well, this is what I mean by symmetry, is that you're talking about how to be a subjective expression of the whole as the object, how to just play your part, because it added to all the other parts adds up to a symmetry, but you can't see the full symmetry from your part in the expression, so therefore it cannot be judged as if one were judging the whole symmetry. Does that make sense?
Yes, my girlfriend just came home. It's beautiful. I'm going to call you back. Talk later, bro. I got to go.
And
bye, brother.
Peace.